In this tutorial, we're going to cover replicating and reproducing a site plan as per this example in Revit. So the first stage of the series of videos will be to how do you set up your draw environment and how do you start establishing the basic road layouts, etc. I have provided a file that has got the preliminary site set up, so with the site cadastral information, including the topo surface. If we go and look at this more closely, you'll notice that your topo surface and your project base point, so if I go to VG and I switch on my site information to project base point, internal and survey points, you'll notice that we're all working around the origin as close as possible and our levels work. So however, our survey point is down below, but that's fine for this example, and this is how you would want to work if you're doing a single building and site combination. This is the preferred method. Nothing stopping you from using x-rays for your site, so external references, so you can always link these Revit files into the site survey file. You could also link it, but just to show you what we have to start with is we've got some basic site information, we've got a topo surface, and in addition to that, we've also got our views pre-set up with True North and Project North. Okay, that's important. So we need to start importing some contextual information to start reproducing the site. So I provided you all with a site information drawing, so we're going to link that in first. We'll link everything in so that we can start reproducing the roads, etc. Okay, so we'll need an external DWG file, which we'll typically get from a surveyor, and then we'll need some aerial photograph information that we can then use to trace some other elements like where the parking exists, etc. Okay, so without further ado, the first thing I would do in Revit is go and set up duplicate this view with detailing, and I'll call this WK, rename. I'll call the site working, WK. There are other ways to manage this, but I'll explain that later on. It's a more advanced technique. So in this file, I'm going to make sure to rotate it to True North. I will switch back and forth between True North and Project North. But when we're loading in another file, we'll just need to be conscious of that True North and Project North. Okay. All right, so I'm happy with the end result here. Let's go back to True North. Now that I've set up my view, the first thing I need to do is go and link in that AutoCAD file very quickly. Okay, so that AutoCAD file can be found on ClickUp. So I'm going to go to Insert, Link CAD. I'm going to go and find this file. Okay, and here I've got the Brooklyn site drawing. Okay, I'm going to say open, and you can see it's brought the file in. However, I did make a mistake in doing so, and as soon as undo, so link CAD, Brooklyn. One thing we need to do, always check here, is make sure this is in meters. These survey drawings are always in meters, so make sure that that's checked. You can set it to current view only or 3D view. That's totally up to you. I'm just going to say current view only because I want to bring this in as a drafting flat element. Okay, and it'll only be visible in this view because I'm going to do a lot of the work in this view, in this working view initially. So I'm going to say current view only. I'm going to say internal origin to internal origin. I'm just going to say center to center for now because this sometimes does cause issues. So auto center to center, and I'm going to preserve everything else and say open. Okay, you won't see the drawing initially just because it will be a drafting element is always beneath. So you might have to go and select that element first. Okay, which I've selected the wrong object. So let's just find, here it is here, site information tab. Now that I've selected the site information, sometimes it's pinned, in this case it's not, and you're just going to move everything to foreground. Because we're going to be tracing it, that's ideal. I can hide, switch off hidden now. So now we've got a whole series of line work in our project. But what we need to do is we need to capture the road center lines, information like that. So let's move this DWG file. I'm going to move it to an origin. So at least we match where these points start. Just remember this is slightly different because we readjusted this cadastral information to suit our design project. Okay, but generally we don't. That's a whole another application on its own to increase an earth size. So you've got to purchase the property from your neighbor, and then you've got to go and get it rezoned. It's quite a complicated process. Okay. All right, now that we've got everything in play and everything's looking correct, I can start drafting over this information. But what's neat about this process, if I go to any other view, that AutoCAD information is not polluting the rest of my views. I only need it for my site context because I need the road center lines. I've got the contour information already, so that's I'm not going to worry about. But what is critical is I need the road center lines. Okay, so I need to start establish some road networks. Now the last thing I need to do is bring in some aerial photographs. Okay, these are very easy to manage, by the way. If you go to manage and you go to manage links, okay, and this is what I tend to do quite a bit. Manage, I'm going to go to manage links. You're going to go and find that CAD file. So once you've found the CAD file, because it's a linked file, just remember if you're importing it, you won't have this option. So here we've got a few tools that we can do. We can unload it, reload it. So if you don't want to see it in the view, that works well. Okay, but generally what I do is I'll go to VG, imported categories, and you'll find the Brooklyn style drawing here as I override. You can actually override these permanently. So let me show you how to do that. So this function, visibility graphics, will only override it for this view only. But that we can do because it's only working in this view. So we can simply use the override tools here to do so. So, or alternatively, if you want to override them for the whole project, you can go to the object styles category. Now you can select this line work and now you can override them accordingly as well. Okay, but I'm just going to use the override function in this case. The other one's just more of a permanent change. So here I'm not going to override the types of line they are. However, I'm going to overwrite their color. And usually I use like a construction line color just so that they stand out a lot better. And you can see that AutoCAD file now is starting to stand out pretty well in the background. Because what I'm looking for is the road center lines, etc. Okay. Right, now that I've started to establish this information, I need to bring in some aerial photographs to start using that as well. Okay. And in this case, I might switch to wireframe because the image will sit below everything. You don't want the image above everything else. The DWG file is fine over everything else, but the aerial photograph I want to bring in and also put underneath all this information. So the first thing I do with the AutoCAD file, once it's in, is pin it. If it's not already pinned, you're going to pin it so that you can't accidentally delete it or something like that. That usually happens. And what I will do in this case is I'll go to VG and I'm going to switch off my topo surface for the time being as well. All right, so you don't want, so we've just got a pure AutoCAD file, we've got some basic site information, and we've got the road center lines. Now we just need some aerial photographs to help us refine the site a bit further. Okay. All right, so once we've got our AutoCAD file in place, we're going to go and find this image quickly. So I'm just going to quickly find this image because the image you've got to drag and drop in. So we're going to go to our project file location. We're going to find the aerial photograph. Okay, that aerial photograph should be here. Okay, I've located my aerial photograph. That's this Hatfield site context PNG. Simply drag and drop it into the view. Okay, and we can see it's starting to work quite nicely. Just remember, we need to scale. We need to scale this image, and it's sitting beneath everything, which is great because you can see where the lines are above. Okay, so let's just find our site contextual information or where everything starts. And you can see that this origin is where I need to move all of this to. So grab the image, select the image, use the move command, grab this intersection as best as you can. It's quite pixelated, but that's fine. And we can put this in the right location for the time being. The last thing we need to do is just use the scale command. And I've got cadastral information in all directions. So in this instance, what I'm going to try and do is I can clearly see how this works. So I'm going to try and scale, I think the road markers over here. So we've got these two narrow sites, 1, 2, and then we've got these two little block sites at the end here, and you can see where they are. So I'm going to use this to scale. Grab my image, I'm going to use a scale command, select my origin, and then I'm going to scale from here, and that's going to go right to the end. Okay, you can see that's done a fairly good job of scaling. Yes, just remember this site cadastral is different, but in terms of context, I'm very happy with this result, so I'm going to leave it there. Okay, all right, so we've got the beginning stages of our site. We've introduced an image, so this image we can also just remember you can go foreground or background. If we go to foreground, just remember to sit over everything else, which is what you don't want. So I'm just going to leave this in the background for now. Just remember, if your topo surface was on, you'll need to use the wireframe mode to start seeing through your topo surface. So let me just bring that back. Topography, switch that back on. So if my topography was on and I'll switch this back onto hidden. Just make sure the image is below background. Okay, let me just see why that's not on. VG topography, press apply. There we go. Okay, right, now you can see what's going on. The image, foreground, background. Okay, and then what you need to enable is the wireframe mode if you want to see through. But I generally, just for this sake, switch off the topography for the time being. I'm going to switch that off, press apply. Okay. All right, so now that I've switched my topography back off, now I can see a lot more clearly. Okay, so now this is the beginning stages of my project. I've got enough information now to start producing a series of line work around this. Just remember, when you're done with the DWG file, you can simply delete it from the view, or you can go to Manage Links and you can go to CAD and you can simply just say remove right at the end. Okay, so we can remove the file totally. Okay, so this is the beginning stages of our project. The last thing we'll need to do is just start preliminarily setting up our sheet. Okay, so if we go to the site plan view, so just remember, a lot of what you're doing in the site plan working view will also start being represented on the site plan view here. Just bear in mind, one thing to bear in mind is annotation or drafting items do not come through to different views. They are view specific. So meaning site plan working view, they will be specific to that view. So you'll need to transfer that data back to the site plan, maybe. Okay, but in the interim, what we're going to try and do now is to start looking at a preliminary setup of our sheet. This is important to do early on because you don't want to be spending a whole lot of time drawing a lot of information that's irrelevant to the project. Okay, so let's go to the site plan view and let's change the scale 1 to 200. And one important thing to do here is I'm going to switch off these markers for the time being, and I'm going to go to VG. I'm going to go to annotation objects, and I'm going to start switching off my elevation markers. So in the annotation category, you're going to go to elevation, switch those off, and sections as well. Okay, we generally don't show this information on our sections, on our site plans. Okay, that's reserved for floor plans, etc. So I just want to basically start setting up the sheet. I'm going to introduce a crop region as well, because I just want to see how much of this information is going to actually show in my sheet. So I'm just going to reduce this a bit. Let's just start with this for now. Go back to my sheet, and you can see, let me just remove this. I'm going to drag it back on again. Here we go. So you can see we've still got a lot of information to crop, and as long as our site information is in play, you can double click to activate the viewport, very similar to AutoCAD, and then you can go and adjust the crop region. So here we can now adjust this to fit in our sheet. Okay, so that's the next, this will be one of the last steps we'll do as part of this video. So I'm just setting up my sheet basically. It's good to have this set up early on. We are going to come back and fine tune this information. Just remember, when you drop a view in, it will try and give it a label. So this, I'm just going to say title with no line. You can, I'll show you how to change that as well. But initially, all that I just want to see on my sheet is I want a basic setup of my sheet on my view on my sheet, so that I don't go and draft unnecessary information. This is enough context for my site plan for the time being. So I will reproduce and move information around a bit to make this work a lot better and look like the example that was provided. Okay. All right. So this will be our first step, making sure that everything's in place, starting to set up our views correctly. Just remember, the site working is where we're going to do a lot of our work, and you can see I've put the images in here, the AutoCAD files. This file was going to be on our sheet. So this view we'll need to start keeping quite clean, because this is going to be our final view for our sheet. So I'm going to switch off like the survey point, project base point, because a lot of that information will be represented on my actual site working. The last thing that we can do is that you'll notice that our topography is quite large and there's a lot of useless information which I can get rid of. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. The last step of this video is to go and reduce the size of this topo surface to meet the correct size of the site. Okay, so we're going to go back to site working. I'm going to change everything back to Project North because I want to work with the rectangle. I'm going to go to VG. I'm going to go to raster images in the model category. Switch off that just so that we don't see that at the moment. I'm going to go to import categories. I'm going to switch off the DWG file. I'm going to switch heading back on, go back to VG, and I'm going to switch top bar surface back on for the time being. Press apply, press OK. Okay, so we can get rid of a large extent of the site. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this existing location of the cadastral information, and I'm going to draw a basic rectangle using grafting lines, and then I'll trim the site to match. So I'm going to go to annotate, detail lines. I'm going to create a rectangle around my site. So that's enough contextual information with regards to the topo surface. So we need to cut away the rest of this topo surface. Okay, and that's quite easily done. You're simply going to go to the massing and site section, and you're going to go and use the split surface command. You're going to select this command, select the surface that you want to cut. And what is neat is because I've already drawn a rectangle, I can simply use this pick line tool, select all of these, and finish the command. So what it'll do is it'll split the surface up into two different surfaces. Just delete the rest of the surface that you don't need, and then tab to select the rest of the detail line work. Now if we go back to our 3D view, you'll notice that our topography is a lot smaller. Okay, this is all I need to produce my site plan. Just go back to site plan one last time just to make sure that everything is still visible. Okay, because this is the full extent of what's going to be on our sheet. I'm happy with the end result. Back in working drawing, in the working site working plan now, I can simply go and change this back to Project North. Okay, True North. Okay, because this we're going to do a lot of working. I'm going to be constantly switching back and forth. Now I can simply go back to VG, switch on my raster image. Okay, and I can go to importer categories and reload my DWG file. Okay, now once again, my apologies, let me just switch off my topo surface. You can also use the temporary hide function, which is what I use mostly. So you can use a temporary hide. So you can say hide element. Okay, hide element. Just remember, if you say reset or you apply hide and isolation view, just remember you'll need to use this light bulb to reveal hidden objects, and then you'll have to use the unhide element command here. Just exactly what's going on. If I go to VG, all I've done is technically I've switched off some of these elements, okay, by hiding it. All right, so if I just simply go and say unhide element and then toggle and reveal, it'll be back. Okay, generally I use the VG option 80% of the time. It varies when you'll use this hide option and this other hide option. Okay, that's up to you, but we'll discuss this later on, especially when we start drafting our floor plans and sections. This starts becoming a bit more relevant. Okay, so that's the initial steps that we're going to take to build the context so that we can reproduce a lot of the site information, because what we didn't get from the surveyor was the adjacent building footprints. And you just got to understand sometimes these aerial photographs are taken at a slight angle, so they're not 100% accurate, but you can see by which I mean if you look at the front of this building, you can see part of the facade. So meaning that the aerial photograph was taken in an angle, so you're not getting the true floor plan. So what I tend to do is draw the outline of the building and then move it to this location here. Okay. But that's also got to do with how many floors it is. These smaller buildings, you won't have to do that as much. There's a slight setback, but that you can address quite neatly. Okay, so I need the site information so I can start reproducing the extents of the adjacent buildings. More or less, you can see here we've got a whole parking area, so the extent of the building is just this little block over here. The rest is parking. Here we've got an alleyway at the back, so we need to just try and capture some of that information. We've got parking along the street here, we've got parking along the street here, we've got parking all over here, and we're very fortunate enough not to have any additional adjacent information. In addition to that, I need to capture all the trees, etc. But I think that's enough for this part of the video.